What was this? What did we just have prior to this? Just to make sure we have the context. Joseph's in jail. He's put in charge. He's put of the jail. Well, not exactly put in charge of the jail because he's still an inmate in the jail. But he is asked to kind of
trusted.
Yeah, but he's asked to kind of like help out these two special prisoners. The two special prisoners are the baker and the butler, the cupbearer. They're there. My guess is because Pharaoh must have gotten a little food poisoning. And I mean, and I think I joke about it, but I think it's totally right, because why else would both of these two guys find themselves in prison? And it's because the Pharaoh wants to know which one of these guys is responsible for getting him sick. Was it his baker or was it his drink maker? And so they're both in jail, and they both have dreams, and they choose to speak to Joseph about their dreams, because Joseph says, "Hey, I can interpret these things," because in Egypt, as we talked about at great length last time, that dream interpretation is very significant, and there are many people who interpret dreams, and there are books about dream interpretation. And so when they were in jail and they had dreams, they were concerned and agitated because they didn't have anybody there to interpret their dreams. So Joseph steps in. Hey, give me a chance. He goes and he interprets dream number one, which is of the butler or the cupbearer or whatever, and he says, and he interprets his dream favorably. Don't worry, 3 days time, you'll be back in your position. But then he ends, and this is where we ended last time. He says, but remember me, right? Remember me, please, because I am here. I'm a victim. I did nothing wrong. We spent a lot of time last week talking about Joseph and not taking any responsibility for his place there. Like, again, it's not to say that he was innocent. He's not innocent. I mean, excuse me, not to say that he's not a victim. He is a victim. He certainly has been thrown into a pit, sold into slavery. That was, I mean, yeah, sure, he had something to do with it, but certainly the crime did not fit the punishment did not fit the crime. Then he goes and rises in Potiphar's house, which is great, and he is wrongly accused of making advances on Potiphar's wife. It's possible that he had something to do with it. We don't, like, did he kind of bring it on a little bit? We don't know, maybe, but still, the fact that clearly it was Potiphar's wife that really did the advances, and he was trying to get away, and he was put in prison for it. So again, whether he is completely wrong, obviously not. Whether he has a little bit to do with it, probably so. Still, his take on it is, I've done nothing wrong. And maybe it's true, though, that when you're in a place in which you've been really wronged in one way or another, it's hard at that moment to see your responsibility. Like if you've been, right, the woman, the spouse, your husband has, is unfaithful and has been having affairs left and right, and you have just been home with the kids. I'm using these terms for the sake of description, but like just you've always just been faithful and stayed at home and took care of the kids and waited for your husband to come home from work or from wherever he was, and then you catch your husband, and he's and all the things that he's been doing, and you get a divorce, and at that moment when you're talking, is that woman able to say, oh, it was 50-50 in terms of what our problems were? No, that woman says he was an ass. Excuse me, I'm recording. He did all this, and he is wrong, and I have been right, and he has been unfaithful, and not me, right? And is that spouse able to say, okay, I wasn't the nicest, I could have given my husband more attention. I could have. I'm not, again, please don't hear me saying that forgiving, infidelity, I'm not. I'm just saying, like, at that moment, a spouse isn't able to kind of, the person the wife who's clearly, been victimized in all this is not in a place to say all of the various different things that she did wrong. It's just like, because it's so clear right now, there's one victim and not the other. So clear it is, same it is with Joseph. And finally, I did point out to you, and then before we get to our new text, that last line, have I done anything here that should have put me in the dungeon? And I did kind of just show you that the word for dungeon is exactly the same word as pit. And they are definitely trying to draw our attention to that. Okay, so verse 16, when the chief baker saw how favorably he had interpreted, he said to Joseph, so.
What about mine?
Right, well, okay, yes, what about mine? That is exactly correct. But what's interesting about it is, so clearly he was more hesitant, like verse 16, chapter 40, verse 16. Like, given the fact that dream interpretation is very serious business and generally means it kind of, at least in this biblical period, it speaks about what is going to happen. Kind of. And we'll talk about that later. But they don't, sometimes you're a little hesitant to tell like if I have a dream that says, I murdered 10 people, I found myself being carted away into prison and then was executed. That was my dream. Am I like, how quick am I going to be to tell my therapist? Right? Yeah. As I'm on I was murdering people, I was carted off to the prison and I was executed. Like, say, Dr. Freud, what do you think that means? Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. No, but the point is that he was hesitant to say it. Why? Because it could be bad. It's a crapshoot.
Yeah.
But you want to say it. You're dying to know what this means. I mean, you'd rather know than not know. But there's also the part which is, I'm not so sure I want to know. Yeah. Right? So he says, Chief Baker saw how favorably he interpreted. He said to Joseph, in my dream, similarly, there were 3 open work baskets on my head. In the uppermost basket were all kinds of food for Pharaoh that a baker prepares. And the birds were eating it out of the basket above my head, right? So the dream is that you're carrying around all this food in baskets and you're not able to shoo the birds away, right?
So it's contaminated.
Contaminated, correct. Or that it's just you don't have control over the situation. It's not yours, right? Joseph answered, this is its interpretation. Oh, and by the way, 3 baskets. Again, the 3 is the important part, at least in terms of dream interpretation, is when you have numbers of things, and especially recollection of numbers of things, that those numbers have meaning. Right. Joseph answered, this is its interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head and impale you upon a pole, and the birds will pick off your flesh.
Not good.
Yeah.
Thoughts other than not? Yes, not good. The other thoughts about this? Yeah.
Well, maybe you could say Joseph's commitment to the truth, or you could just say his frankness or his bluntness. I mean, he sees the dream interpretation. He knows what the interpretation is. He does not try to sugarcoat it or use euphemisms or anything like that. He really lays it on him. It kind of suggests to me that he's guilty too.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. I mean, the last part, by the way, is like almost the most gruesome of it, right? Yeah. It's like, in Egypt, what do we know about death rituals?
People were buried.
Buried, that's correct. And also
Bodies were preserved.
Right.
That's exactly right. Embalming.
Right.
Right? And what's the dream here? What's the interpretation here?
Is that with regular people too?
I don't know, but clearly it's I don't know, but I'll bet you that the chief butler or a baker would have it, even if it wasn't, or even if it wasn't necessarily the person who works in the grain mill. But point is that what the dream is that, or the interpretation is, not only are you going to be killed, but also,
The birds are going to
Your
eat.
body be desecrated.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think a lot of the ancient cultures had a thing where the body was sacred, and by doing that, you in the afterlife, you need your body in some form or another, and like you said with the embalming is one of the, and by doing that, you basically made it difficult, and I don't know what this, I don't know enough about it to say definitively, but it seems that if by doing that, you basically kept them from having a favorable result with regard to the afterlife. That's the best I can say
Yeah.
for it at this point.
yeah,
Yeah.
And that's what happened to Saul.
yes,
Yes.
that is what happened to Saul. Very good.
What power
But-
Joseph has
Well,
here
well,
to
especially
say,
right.
you did this good thing, and in 3 days, good things are gonna happen, and you're gonna be in trouble in 3 days.
Right.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Who else is getting this information about the interpreted dreams? Who else is listening to this?
nobody. When that's what's amazing about it, right? Is that no one has this. I'm looking for something. Real quick. No one has this.
Nobody.
It's part of the biblical concept, which is once it's interpreted, it comes true.
It comes true.
But it's
Okay,
not totally
certainly,
out of the
good.
blue. I mean, obviously Joseph knew the Pharaoh's birthday was in 3 days, as probably the whole country did. Right?
That's very good. Yeah. And so what you think? What?
Good point.
So and the Pharaoh probably did a lot of pardoning or whatever on his birthday.
Well, possibly. And it was just like so. But maybe it's a good idea. Or I was reading some thoughts about how it's not necessarily his birthday, but his anniversary of coming into because it's the only time, by the way, in the entire Bible. We haven't even gotten there yet, but it's the only time in the entire Bible that that a birthday is mentioned. No one in the entire Bible has a birthday other than Pharaoh right here, ever. Not one,
Wow.
never, right? No other birthdays ever. So it's either just unique or maybe it's the anniversary of his ascension to Pharaoh. I'm not sure, but I'm not ready to go there yet.
Yeah.
We still have more stuff to talk about. So,
But I think Joseph believes his own interpretations.
but God, yeah, he believes
Yeah.
that God he does this. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I definitely. But again, the whole but I'd like you want to go back to this.
Yeah.
Dreams are great, but they mean nothing until they're interpreted.
Right.
At least according to the biblical view. So therefore, I mean, and according to Freud and the Bible, they both agree dreams
Yeah.
until their life interpreted them mean nothing, right?
Yeah.
But Joseph's dreams are the first ones, and I think I mentioned this, but worth me reminding you is that the first dream. Joseph says, we were all these binding sheaves, and he tells it to his brothers, binding sheaves,
Right.
and and your sheaves all bow down to mine, right? And then he has another dream, which he told to the brothers,
Right.
and they don't. The first one they interpret. They say, "Do you mean to reign over us? Do you mean to rule over us?" And they hated him more. It says.
Right.
And then the next day, Joseph has another dream, and this time, the sun, the moon, the 11 stars were all bowing down. And the brothers stay silent. Why? Because they're like, we're not interpreting it.
Yeah.
We're not going to give more.
Credence. Yeah.
And so then the story goes, and so he told it again, this time to his father. And his father interpreted it. In other words, they know that if you don't want this to come to light, then don't interpret it.
Right.
Because we have the power and the capacity to keep this from happening.
Right.
Yes, Paul.
According to Freud, dreams very often are wish fulfillments. What you wish for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But yes. But all I'm saying is that in this particular case, that it also has to do with the moment someone interprets it, skilled or not, is what happens.
Mm-hmm.
So here's the part which I think is so fascinating. right? And not fast. Let me phrase that. Not so fascinating. I would say instead so incredible in terms of the writing. And this is one of those cases in which you have to know the Hebrew.
Okay.
So I'm just going to walk you through it.
All right.
Okay? You got to go back to the previous page or chapter 40. And we are looking at the first interpretation. So that is verse 13.
40:13.
Yep. Okay. So hopefully, for some reason, I'm struggling to share my screen with you guys on Zoom. So I apologize. Hopefully, you guys all see where I am. Chapter 40, verse 13. It is. If you're using the sheets that I gave you, you can find it on. We're looking up. You can see the number 13, 2, 4, 6 lines up from the bottom on page 84. Does everyone kind of see where I am? If you are close and you need my help to kind of point it to you, I can help you. Okay. So verse 13, the Hebrew goes like this: Ba'od shaloshet yamim. That means in another 3 days. Yisa Pharaoh et roshcha. Pharaoh will lift up your head. V'hashivcha al kanecha, and restore you to your post. Okay? So the Ba'od shaloshet yamim, in 3 more days, Yisa Pharaoh et roshecha. Pharaoh will lift up. Yisa, lift up, Pharaoh, et, here comes the direct object, that means here comes the direct object, roshcha, your head. Okay? Now, let's look at the language used in the second one. And that is verse 18. No, verse 19, sorry. Right? Everyone on verse 19. So now we're on the next page, or our page, obviously. So, and go down to, you see the number 19, and take a look at the Hebrew, because it starts exactly the same way. Ba'od shaloshet yamim, in another 3 days.
Yeah.
Exactly the same words as the previous. Yisa Pharaoh et roshecha. Pharaoh will lift up your head. Me'alaich, from you. Now,
From you.
that's the next day. That's the next word. So in other words, can you imagine?
Yeah.
I mean, talk about the, how do I put it? The drama,
The suspense.
right? The suspense. So, because remember, the baker has just listened to the previous one, and Joseph says to the, after the cupbearer comes and he goes, Od shloshet yamim. And the cupbearer is like, yeah. Pharaoh yisa et roshecha. Yisa Pharaoh et roshecha. Pharaoh will lift up his head and restore you to your post. And then you have then the baker comes up, and Joseph goes, oh shaloshet yamim, in 3 days, and the baker's going, yeah. Pharaoh, Yisa, Pharaoh et roshecha. Pharaoh will lift up his head, your head, and then the baker's like, yes, me'alayich, from you. He's gonna cut your head off, and it's like the suspense is like amazing in terms of the way. Can you picture it?
Yeah.
And it's like, oh my God, how disappointing. I mean, not disappointing.
Disappointing,
Can you imagine just how the blood just went from his face when he was like, because he was getting the same, and admittedly the first 3 words in 3 more days, let's call it, have been easily formulaic, and the baker was not necessarily, kind of was like, yeah, but then after the next 4 words, the baker was like, all right, and then he adds, what? It's like you can imagine ... or like long pause, and then from you. And then it's like, ugh.
You could stage that, you can make a play out of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the whole point. It's like the drama is amazing, amazing. That's how I see it. I love that. I love it.
Yeah.
So that's right. So then we get to the next part. On the third day, his birthday. Again, birthday, rise to power, unclear. I mean, it says, the Hebrew says, Vayhi b'yom hashlishi yom huledet.
What verse are we on?
Verse 20. So Yom Huledet is birthday. We sing Yom Huledet Sameach, Yom Huledet. So there's no doubt about it. It's birthday, but at the same time, it's, since it's the only birthday recorded in the Bible, you just wonder. I'm not saying it's not true. It very well could be his birthday for all we know. It's the only one we have in the Bible. Anyway, on his birthday, Pharaoh made a banquet for all his officials, and he singled out his chief cupbearer and his chief baker from among his officials. Right? It's like, and you're right. Kathy, were you the one saying? I agree that maybe it was like, on that day it was pardoning day. Right? And he, and you can imagine these two guys coming up, and the baker knows what's about to happen because he had his dream, for him. So it's not a surprise. He restored the chief cupbearer to his cupbearing, and he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand, just as he had done in the dream. But the chief baker he impaled, just as Joseph had interpreted to them. Now, I do want to say that the English is a bad translation. Man, that's loud.
What is that?
One more.
Long leaves.
Yeah, so anyway, now that's the lawnmower. Right? So if you're waiting for the lawnmower, now you got it. Right. So it's bad translation. I mean, it's not. The reason why they did this translation is because they were just trying to be consistent, but it's not a good translation. So the word in verse 22, fourth word in verse 22, which is tala, that means hanged, not impaled. Yeah.
In the previous session, in the previous few lines before 20, he's impaled our AIDS. Is AIDS tree or pole? The English says he will impale you upon a pole.
Right,
The
tree.
Hebrew says our AIDS.
Tree.
Tree.
And now that I think about it, they say talab there also. So and maybe what they're saying is that why they would have said,
If you
yeah,
cut
be
off
hanged on a
somebody's
tree.
head,
It's like, it seems to, I don't know why they
if
had
you
to
cut
go
off somebody's head, you can't hang them. You
Right.
have to impale them. I mean,
Yeah, if you
there's
cut
nothing
off
to
their head,
hang
they're-
you from. Yeah.
They're in a bag.
Yeah,
Unless they hang you from your feet.
yeah.
Ew. Even worse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then you get all the blood dripping out.
Yeah.
Great.
Could it be that Joseph was given the task of finding out what happened between these two guys, that the Pharaoh was sick, know which one did it, and he figured that out.
Yeah.
And so then here's his opportunity, the two dreams, and he could say, okay, you're good and you're not. But the guy who had the baker who had the second dream was thinking, well, how am I going to formulate this dream so that it's not my fault that it was the birds? It was something beyond my control.
Right.
So it wasn't my fault that the Pharaoh got sick. And so I'm giving you the excuse so that you could save me as well.
That's fascinating. I think you're right. I think it's great. I don't have any comment other than I think it's great insight. And just to make sure, she was saying was that the dream was almost like written in a way to kind of give plausible deniability, or to give a written-in excuse that it was the bird's fault, not mine. That you may have gotten sick on my watch, but I didn't really know it was happening, or I couldn't have stopped it. And Joseph had the opportunity to kind of save him too, and didn't. It's interesting.
Well, did he have really the opportunity?
Sure, he could have interpreted it any way he wanted to.
He could have, but does that mean that the Pharaoh
Right.
Pharaoh didn't know about the interpretation.
That's
so it
correct.
wouldn't
All
have
Pharaoh knew, right, all it was that, but the only difference is that, you're right. Again, though, it goes back to what I was saying before, regardless of whether I agree with it or not.
But divinely,
And that is that once it happens, it happens. In other words,
Right.
once the dream is interpreted, then it's gonna happen.
Right.
well,
exactly as
that's
interpreted.
because it's divinely inspired. Joseph interpreted as God told him it was.
Right. And so it's going to happen because the Bible and God, and I mean, it's part of the theology, which is that God's not going to be wrong.
But isn't the last sentence there to show that Pharaoh didn't know how Joseph interpreted it? Because
Yes.
if the
Yes.
cupbearer never said anything, then Pharaoh still doesn't know.
Correct. No, and we know that Pharaoh has no idea about
Right.
Joseph. We probably also have, it's entirely possible, and I do believe to be the case, that Potiphar put Joseph on you be with these two guys to find out the truth, because probably, Pharaoh said to Potiphar, find out which one of these, and Pharaoh didn't know which one of Potiphar's underlings did all the work. But so it's possible that Joseph told Potiphar, and Potiphar took the credit, and told Pharaoh. Possible, or I don't know. But
Yeah.
what we do know is that Pharaoh has no idea that Joseph made this interpretation. That's
Right.
And it says, yet the chief cupbearer. So after all of this happened, just this one last line, which is an important thing. Yet the chief cupbearer did not think of Joseph; he forgot him. Before it said, think of me when all is well with you again, and it says he did not think of him; he forgot him. And
Yeah.
it's what's important is that and this happens in the Torah somewhat regularly, which is that you have these kind of strange repetitions, like he did not think of him. Could be enough, but then it goes on to say he forgot it. Right? So why do you think it adds that second line? I mean, by the way, I have a sermonic interpretation of it. In other words, I have an exegetical kind of interesting kind of opinion about it, but I don't know and I'll tell you, but that will be very Arthur of me. What I'm saying is,
Yeah.
I'll give you my Arthur interpretation.
Yes.
And I'm not trying to be, well, not you, Arthur. Right. And I'm not trying to be, the different one is not here today. And I'm not suggesting that there's anything wrong with what I'm just saying. I don't think that what I'm about to tell you is really why it was written this way. But before I tell you, anybody have a thought about why this might be written? That he did not think of him, he forgot him.
It's a setup for the later part of the story.
Yeah, but he could have.
Joseph
But it could have been just one of them, and it still would have been the same setup, right?
Yeah, well, it didn't matter. The fact that this is the narrative that the authors of the Bible wanted to set. It's just to set this story in the context.
I see, and to emphasize it as a way of kind of really keep bringing your attention to this, and that's true. It does bring your eye to it. You do a repeat like that, it's like okay. Why are you telling us this?
He forgot him because he was a jailbird.
Right, but what I'm not. No. I'm not. Yes, we know why the forgetting happened. The question is, why did the narrator say he did not think of him, he forgot him? Why the repeat? Why not just stay with one of those two? Just either he did not think of them or he forgot him. But why both of them?
Because the later narrative talks about the Pharaoh's dream, and they say, "Oh, by the way," and that therefore you're saying
it's a setup just to really draw your eyes to it.
You do it in the theater. Does every
for sure.
I mean, we can talk about all
the Torah is a little different than kind of theater, but you're right.
The people who wrote. I mean, I'm cynical, I know, but the fact that people who wrote this had
flair for that.
But they had to show that Joseph somehow came into good graces with Pharaoh, and this is the way.
Agreed.
This is set up to do it. I don't think unless somebody can come up with another.
Yeah, I'm struggling to come up with a reason why you would do it double.
It's just educational, just to stress your point. If they missed it, if you're talking to people because they can't read it,
Mhm.
then it's like you
But
say,
there's so many other parts of the Torah which could do that, and which probably would have been helpful if it did it, but
Yeah.
doesn't. And and yet here, I'm just struggling with. It's, in fact, it happens so infrequently, and I'm not disputing that it's an important piece to bring us to the next part. But I'm just kind of curious as to why they don't double up things, and there's plenty of other things that they could have, and they
Yeah.
don't double them up. Why do they double this up, Tom?
Well,
Comment.
It
One
does,
second.
it does point to the unfairness that Joseph has experienced. To whatever extent he is a victim, he's a little bit more of a victim
Yeah.
because of this, and so he's bringing that out.
Yet another example about how he's been betrayed by the people around him, right? This is third betrayal, at least.
I have a problem with that anyway.
Wait, hold on. Let
Yeah,
Ellen go,
yeah,
and then
go.
Ellen comment.
Okay, I am the cupbearer. I've been in prison. I get released. I have duties. I have to get everything back in order, or it was all sloppy. The people who took my place didn't do a good job. I got to get all my people together. I'm so busy, I'm overwhelmed. I forgot.
Agreed.
Okay, wait a minute. I didn't think of him. I was just so overwhelmed with getting back and doing what I need to do and remaining in good graces so I don't get sent back to the dungeon that I forgot. First of all, I didn't think of him. And then in the overwhelming rehabilitation that I'm getting, I forgot.
Yeah, I hear you. No, I feel as if all of your description of the cupbearer, which I agree with, still works with just leaving out the words he forgot him. I'm agreeing with you, but I just don't know why.
I think it's more long term. I didn't think about it because I was overwhelmed, and then I totally forgot.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
All right, good thought.
Is forgetting a more active process, like he maybe intentionally forgot, didn't want to bring up this bad thing, didn't want to remind anybody that he'd been in
Yeah.
bad graces?
I do believe that's the case.
Yeah.
I do believe that's the case. I don't think though I don't, and so therefore one is unintentional and one's intentional.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe. Huh. That's interesting. I like it.
I still have a problem with Joseph, period. Okay? He's like the bratty kid that tattles on his brothers
Right.
and everything. And he got what he deserved. And he did the same thing when he got to Pharaoh. And he got what he deserved. That's why he's in jail. Until he grows up and takes responsibility for his own actions,
I agree with that.
then he should stay there. I'm
No,
sorry.
I think the punishment doesn't fit the crime, but
Yeah,
but I
well,
agree
back
with
in
your
the day,
bigger
the
point.
punishments were a lot worse
That's
than they
right.
are today.
I mean, so my theological, and let's call it channeling a different Arthur, and what he would say, I think that he would say is that remembering is intentional. You have to intentionally try to remember, and so therefore, he did not think as there was an intention. There was a intention not to remember, and it works for all of us. That's the theological part, which is what God's trying to tell us. That's again, I don't really believe those
That's
words,
because
but what
your
I'm trying
Uncle
to,
Joseph
I'm just
died.
saying it's a nice little interpretation, which is that for us, which is like, look, if you're not mindful of remembering, then you're going to forget.
And it was such a bad episode in his life, he put it aside. Is that it?
Well, yeah, I think so. Yeah. So, all right, we got 7 minutes. We can do a little bit more.
Okay.
All right, so verse
Chapter 41.
and by the way, and yes, I think that to go back to Karen, what you're saying, and I guess Ellen, what you were saying also, which is that although shaped a little differently than what you were saying, Ellen, but that is that it's not about the overwhelm and about, to me, I'm not saying what's real. I'm saying another thought, which is not about the overwhelm or all the things, my desk is so messy because I've been gone for a while now, but rather he's if he doesn't want to bring up Joseph, because in doing so, he would have to kind of remind people of the fact that he spent time in jail. For that matter, remind Pharaoh that, hey, there was a time in which you accused, like, it's kind of one of those things that let's just never talk about this episode again.
Mhm.
Right? The time when I, has anyone here ever spent an overnight in jail? Anybody on screen? Eric, I knew you were going to be you. Okay, so like, so Eric, is it obviously with the quickness with which you raised your hand, was it civil obedience?
Yes.
I knew it was going to be civil obedience.
Disobedient.
Disobedience.
No. I intentionally said civil obedience.
No, that wasn't me. It was disobedience.
It was clear disobedience.
Mm-hmm.
Well, are you proud of it?
Very much so.
Okay, so it's different then. All right, fine. What was it? Just to tell us.
I got arrested at May Day in 1971, and I was in jail for 5 days.
Wow. No, what I was going to say is others here who have spent a night in jail or been to jail even, it's one of those things of we just don't like. I don't like to bring that subject. It's a really embarrassing thing for me. It's really and Eric's aside, obviously, that's a different when you go. That's why I called it civil obedience, because isn't that what why am I forgetting his name? The congressperson from Georgia. Lewis. John Lewis, right?
Yeah.
Isn't that what he called it? Civil obedience?
Yeah.
I mean, I tell you, even just walking into the jail, I've had a number of clients walking into the jail and meeting people. It's a scary place to be.
Yeah.
Well, right. No, I agree.
And nobody in the right mind would want to be there.
No, I agree. But what I'm saying is that also it serves as like a very negative memory.
Oh yeah.
Right. And
absolutely.
so you don't want to it's like we're just going to never bring this subject up again.
Yeah.
It's not something I want to talk about. It's not something that I want to, make part of my narrative. I just want to just forget that little mini chapter of my life. Right. So, and maybe that's what's going on with the cupbearer, the butler. He is just, why did he not bring it up? I just don't want to remind Pharaoh of this. I don't want to talk about it. It's embarrassing. I was wrongfully imprisoned. I'm a little resentful of it, even though I'm not going to make, I don't want to have that be part of my conversation. All the stuff, don't want to talk about it. Right. So it's like, that could very well be what's at play here.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about the cupbearer saying, I don't want to help Joseph. Because, he interpreted his dream favorably. He probably does want to help Joseph. He just also kind of wants to say, that's just a different chapter, putting it aside. In any event, after 2 years' time, so that means that Joseph's just been sitting around in jail for 2 years. It's kind of remarkable when you think about it. Like, this is a 2-year span that we have literally no idea what's been going on in Joseph's life. Right? It's like there's so much living that happened here with no information. And this, by the way,
no longer has that assignment.
Well, that's for sure, because neither of them are there anymore.
Right.
Right. So, during that time, it's entirely possible that Joseph was just, in the same way that I think I'm going to use this image last time, in the same way that an inmate studies law during the 10 years or 20 years that they're in jail. Maybe he studied dream interpretation. Maybe he got an MBA, and he from
Hitler wrote Mein Kampf.
Hitler wrote Mein Kampf, right?
This chapter has a title. Is that?
Yes and no. It's not a title, but rather it's the Torah portion. So every Torah portion has, so the Torah is divided up into 50 Torah portions, one read every week.
Yeah.
And the reason why you'd say, well, shouldn't it be 52? And it's because we're not on the solar calendar and the lunar calendar. And so it's just and there are double portions and whatever, but generally 50 portions. So therefore, and it's done by week, and so this is the Torah portion, a change in Torah portion. Now, by the way, interesting, I say all the time, and just as a way for you to see, every Torah portion is it's not a title, it's a meaningless word, except for the fact that it's just a reflection of the first important word in the Torah. So therefore, in that portion. And the name of every Hebrew book of the Bible, of the Torah, is the first Torah portion, right? So the first, how does the book of Genesis begin? It goes, in the beginning God created, right? And so the Hebrew, Bereshit bara Elohim, is the first three words of the Torah. And so the word Bereshit is the name of the first Torah portion, because it's the first word of the Torah. And oh, by the way, that's also because it's the name of the portion, which is the first portion of that book. That means the name of the book of Genesis is Bereshit. Right. Genesis is what is Genesis? The creation or the origin of, and which is different than in the beginning. Yeah. The book of Numbers, right, is in Hebrew is Bamidbar, which means in the wilderness. Two different things. Just because Bamidbar is the name of the first book, which is therefore the name of the first portion, which is the name of the first book. Anyway.
Which one is Vayikra? And he called
Leviticus.
Leviticus.
Yeah. So here, the name of the Torah portion is Miketz. And if you look, it's the second word in Hebrew, Vayihi Miketz. And it's just because Vayihi is, and means, and it was. It's not a consequential Hebrew word or Torah word, and so they skip it. They go just to the first kind of meaty word, Miketz, which means at the end. So anyway, after 2 years' time, or at the end of and by the way, the Hebrew Vayihi Miketz Shnatayim Yamim. Vayihi means and it was, or Miketz at the end. Shnatayim, 2 years, Yamim, days. So it's like at the end of 2 years of days.
Oh. Long day.
Right. That's exactly right. 2 years of days. Yeah. Oh my God! Every single day it was like a notch mark on the wall, right?
Yeah.
That he was
still in prison.
Yeah.
Well, I noticed you're talking about that, but we had 40 started with sometime later, kind of an unspecified time. Yeah. And then he was clearly, there was some period before you got to the sometime later.
Yeah.
So we don't know how long that poor soul's been.
In jail.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, again, I told you I was going to look it up, so this is one of those examples in which I tell you I'm going to look something up and I don't.
You don't.
So I didn't. But I seem to remember that he was 28 at this time. Well, 28 when he interpreted the dreams, 30 when he goes before Pharaoh. Okay. And I think it's like we find out that he's 30 when he goes before Pharaoh, and so I subtracted 2 years and said he's 28. So, but the point is, and he's 18 when he's with his father. So 10 years go from when he's with his brothers to when he's to the point where he meets up with the cupbearer and the baker, and then 2 more years. Okay. We'll stop here because it's a little bit, it's already, but so we are not meeting again until, let's look at my calendar, but let me just write this down.
If I hear the phrase you used before on
Ken Yehi, may it be. Ken Yehi, let's see, so we're definitely not meeting next week. And I've got, you know what, my daughter's going to Israel. I'm going to ask that we not meet the following week too.
Okay.
So
9th.
Next time we meet is the 9th, yeah.
Okay, January 9th.
I have a message from Arthur.
Wait 1/2 second. Let me just right here.
So that's the day after the pancake breakfast.
Oh.
If you're into that kind of thing. Go ahead, message from Arthur.
Arthur, day 5, unchanged, meds not helping. I think it will take another few days. Say hi to everyone for me. Thanks.
Oh, wow.
What happened to him?
I got COVID.
And the med is not working?
The med is not working.
Yeah, but what, I mean, like the COVID?
Paxlovid?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They get
Was he
the
vaccinated?
monoclonal
Yes.
antibodies.
Damn,
Yeah.
Scary.
scared. What else can you do?
Not
You can
the
just, I
old.
mean, again, I'm not trying to be like, but can't you just be sick and just kind of sit around, drink chicken soup, and then come back out in a couple
Well, the
days?
problem is that it doesn't always work that way.
Yeah.
It depends.
If you're younger, it's easier.
All right, maybe
Yeah,
maybe I don't mean to downplay this. I really
Yeah.
don't. I'm really just trying to understand it. At this point, with so many people vaccinated, yeah, it's out there. We get sick.
What can you do?
Long COVID, I get, but like,
No.
would we be having if someone called in and said I've got the flu,
People are dying.
Still.
but you can die from the flu too?
Yes,
If
indeed.
if you haven't been vaccinated.
Even if you have.
Well,
because
if
only
Yeah.
covers normally
Depends on
30
upon
if
days.
you have a problem with it.
Right? If someone called in and said I've got the flu, would we be? And I'm not really.
Yeah.
Would we say, oh?
It depends which someone, if they have
Yeah.
breathing
Yeah.
problems and respiratory
You're right.
problems.
Arthur has
Yeah.
respiratory problems.
Yes,
How old
It
are
matters a
you?
lot.
Yeah.
No, not
Yeah,
yet.
you young folks don't know.
I'm not trying to. No, I'm saying, I'm
And
just.
they also
I'm trying to
say
just
that
wrap myself around this because I feel. I know that 2 years ago we really had no idea about it. No, there's no vaccine and all that kind of stuff, and that was like a big deal.
But still, all the vaccines is reduced the percentage of the people.
Rabbi, you're younger as well.
Barely.